Cushing, Editor-in-Chief at GameLuster, and this is The Score, a weekly digest of news and commentary from GameLuster and around the industry for the week ending July 1st, 2023. In an effort to attract users and hopefully make some money in the process, the MetaQuest VR system will be introducing a new service. Dubbed MetaQuest Plus, the monthly subscription service promises access to 2 selected VR titles each month for current MetaQuest 2 and MetaQuest Pro users. The service is promised to be, quote, forward compatible with the upcoming MetaQuest 3, scheduled to release this fall. The monthly cost will be $7.99 US, with an annual option of $59.99 US. As with Sony's PlayStation Plus subscription, access to claimed titles is contingent upon an active subscription. Granted, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but if Zuckerberg thinks he can actually make this pay off, he may be in for a rude awakening. The situation is logistical and has 2 prongs to it. First, does the MetaQuest have a sufficiently active install base to make this profitable, or at least a break-even proposition? The numbers are iffy, with a piece from the Wall Street Journal back in April citing internal meta documents from October 2022 that there are some 6 million active users, conflicting with a sales announcement from July of last year stating almost 15 million MetaQuest 2 units had been sold. Second, does the platform have enough content to justify the subscription? If they're trying to mimic PS Plus, they'll have enough content for almost 21 years, assuming they don't repeat, don't offer up any extra titles, and don't have any new titles appearing on the platform. And it also assumes that the platform will remain viable for that long. Year Development announced that their free-to-play shooter The Cycle Frontier would be shutting down permanently on September 27th. A report from Kotaku carried the developer's announcement of the shutdown, stating that the game was no longer, quote, financially viable. They cited a rapid drop in players since the game's release last July, spurred by rampant cheating. The game's Season 2 content apparently also underperformed, accelerating the process. Yeager apparently considered making the game playable offline with private servers, but found it wasn't feasible. The company stated, quote, "The Cycle Frontier is a server-based game with a dedicated back-end system, which doesn't allow keeping the game somewhat available after being shut down. Anybody who bought the game after June 14th will be eligible for a refund. This particular game wasn't on my radar, but it sounds like this title was essentially doomed from the start. Any sort of online element is inherently going to offer opportunities for cheaters to make trouble, and when they do, smaller games like The Cycle Frontier suffer far more than a larger title like Call of Duty or Destiny 2 would. Combine that with the logistical demands of a live service game, and its demise is inevitable almost to the point of calculation. It sucks that this game, like so many others, will not have a chance to live on after shutdown. Whether or not it was worthy of being preserved as a historic and cultural artifact is now entirely mooted, and we're all a little poorer for it." For reasons known only to God and Yves Guillemot, Ubisoft is taking another stab at incorporating blockchain technologies into an upcoming game. The recently announced Champions Tactics Grimoria Chronicles, which Ubisoft describes as, quote, a brand new PvP tactical RPG experimental game, will be using the Oasis blockchain. However, Ubisoft has not deigned to make any mention about how the game will be using that particular blockchain scheme. The official site only gives the vague release window of soon. A teaser trailer shows outlines of what look like tabletop RPG-style miniatures, which hints at what Ubisoft could be shooting for, but we'll doubtlessly have to wait for further details. What's particularly puzzling is that they're trying a whole new game with a whole new blockchain scheme, despite the backlash and rapid decline of their first attempt. Ubisoft basically abandoned Ghost Recon Breakpoint in April of last year, and its Ubisoft Quartz NFTs, backed by the Tezos blockchain scheme, were a big reason for player discontent. While Guillemot said at the time, quote, "We are still in research mode," one would think their research demonstrated gamers absolutely hate the idea of blockchain, if the post-mortem on Breakpoint was conducted with anything resembling intellectual honesty. On the other hand, this is Ubisoft, where what Yves says goes, is pretty much the default operating state of the company. Chances are Ubisoft will once again try to convince themselves that blockchain is a viable gaming technology, and gamers will likely not be convinced. Testimony in the FTC injunction trial against the Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger continued this week, and turned the circus into a genuine 3-ring affair. The highlights of this week's activity are as follows. Sony CEO Jim Ryan spent a lot of time on the witness stand, revealing a good bit of Sony's strategic thinking within the game market. He commented that cloud gaming will likely be a significant part of PlayStation's business model sometime between 2025 and 2035. Ryan also pointed out that the current deal with Activision for Call of Duty only extends to the end of 2024, and that he has not asked for a new deal with Activision. With regards to console exclusivity, Ryan testified that while he didn't like the exclusivity slapped onto Redfall and Starfield, he, quote, doesn't view it as anti-competitive. That said, Ryan went on to point out that Microsoft's position as both game publisher and platform manufacturer is a large part of why the merger question is not as cut and dried as Phil Spencer and Bobby Kotick would like it to be. Quote, there is a complete difference between the incentives that Activision has and that Microsoft would have post-acquisition, he said. Improperly redacted documents revealed that Sony spent well over $200 million US each to develop The Last of Us Part 2 and Horizon Forbidden West. Naughty Dog employed almost 200 people in their effort, while Guerrilla Games employed 300. The same tranche of documents also revealed that about 1 million PlayStation users played nothing but Call of Duty, generating $1.5 billion US worldwide, with more than half of that just within the United States. Given an active user count on PlayStation consoles of 108 million as of March 2023, that works out to not quite 1% of the total install base. But that's still $1.5 billion, which suddenly vanishes at the start of 2025, which isn't an insignificant sum. Also in that same tranche of documents, an interesting datum appeared. Prior to initiating the Activision Blizzard deal, Microsoft looked at 100 companies as acquisition targets, including Sega Sammy. It wasn't on Microsoft's shortlist, and Microsoft apparently did not make an effort to initiate an acquisition, but the news that it had ever been a vague possibility was apparently enough to send Sega's stock price to levels not seen since 2007, before COO Shuji Utsumi quashed any further speculation. In an interview with Bloomberg, Utsumi said, quote, we are very close with Microsoft and have a great relationship with its management team. Microsoft particularly has a high regard for us. Xbox's Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond are really serious about values that video game fans emphasize, end quote. While the FTC is still in the midst of the injunction to prevent the Microsoft-Activision Blizzard merger from completing before the breakup date, the UK's Competition and Markets Authority has been denied in their efforts to reschedule their trial concerning the merger in the UK. The Competition Appeal Tribunal indicated that the original date of July 28th will be the start of the trial, stating in a filing, quote, the matter is significant, and there is a large amount of material for any new counsel to digest, but we anticipate that a month allows ample time for that to happen, provided the CMA selects counsel with appropriate availability to prepare, especially given the support available from within the CMA and from its existing counsel team. The question answers itself. This is a team that should have sufficient time to ensure that the CMA's defense to the application is appropriately conducted. Finally, while still on the subject of the Microsoft-Actiblizz merger, the Canadian Competition Bureau has apparently reached out to Judge Jacqueline Corley, and in a letter to the judge informed her that they notified Microsoft and Activision Blizzard that, quote, the proposed merger is likely to result in a substantial prevention and or lessening of competition with respect to gaming consoles and multi-game subscription services, as well as cloud gaming. The CCB, however, stated that they are, quote, continuing to monitor the transaction, which suggests that they have not made a final ruling in the same fashion that the FTC and the CMA have. Microsoft, in turn, responded that the window in which Canadian regulators could act to block the merger has closed, which seems potentially antagonistic and a little snippy, particularly if the CCB really hasn't made a final ruling on the matter. Yet all of this posturing, all of the procedural folder roll, fails to answer a single and, I would think, burning question. How does this merger benefit gamers? So far, all we've heard about is Call of Duty, but honestly, they're a small segment of the gaming community. A loud and highly visible one, sure, but not a significant number in relative terms by any stretch. We've heard a lot about cloud services and game streaming, but frankly, we've been hearing about the great promise of those technologies for more than a decade at this point, and the logistics then are just the same as they are now. If anything, they're probably a little worse given the rate of advancement in processing and rendering capabilities compared to the rate of deployment for increasing capacities of high-speed data lines outside of tech-centric zones like Redmond and Silicon Valley. So let's bottom line this for the general gaming community. Are game prices going to go down if the merger goes through? Almost certainly not. Are game development costs going to go down if the merger goes through? Hell no. Are we going to see subscription service costs go down if the merger goes through? Not a chance. The only people that are going to benefit from this are Bobby Kotick and maybe Microsoft. And I only say maybe because Microsoft, as a games publisher, simply cannot seem to get their act together. Phil Spencer, so far, has managed to avoid the mistake of being a condescending ass to his customers the same way Don Matrick was. But consider that it's taken almost 15 years for them to come up with a genuine reboot of what was once a beloved game series, Fable. Consider that they have allowed 343 Studios to basically screw the Halo franchise, the Xbox's first flagship IP right into the ground with onerous microtransactions, uninspired content, and all the usual technical issues associated when you stand up a live service game. Redfall was an unmitigated disaster, where the only good thing that came about from getting slapped with an Xbox exclusive tag is that more players weren't exposed to the disappointment factor. Right now, people are already pissed off about Overwatch 2 and the Season Pass shenanigans coming up in Diablo 4, not to mention the continuing slow decline of player population in World of Warcraft. The potential problems and bad faith actions players may encounter if this merger goes through absolutely beggar the imagination. For all the attention paid to Call of Duty, it's ultimately one series out of many, and any special consideration it might get if the merger completes may very well come at the expense of dozens of other titles. Frankly, the gaming public deserves better. It deserves an answer to the question cui bono that doesn't involve Bobby Kotick or Microsoft. Unfortunately, it's not going to get that answer, and that lack of answer should be the single greatest factor in preventing this merger. If you can't tell the people who buy your products how this whole affair will genuinely help them in the here and now, not 4 or 5 years down the road, then it's not a good deal. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. You can find other news articles along with guides, reviews, and features on our website, GameLuster.com. The opening music for the score was written and performed by Nirav Gandhi. I'm Axel Cushing, Editor-in-Chief at GameLuster, and this has been The Score. Thank you for listening.